Yeah, it's really complicated.
Okay, if I had a gavel, I've found it. I'm going to call this meeting to order. This meeting is being conducted with a virtual component. Anyone wishing to address the Council Sustainability Committee virtually could join the meeting on Zoom using the link or phone number and webinar ID shown on the screen. When the chair announces an item you wish to speak on, use your raise hand button. And when the chair calls your name to provide public comment, if you're participating via phone, please press *6 to unmute yourself. For in-person attendees, fill out a speaker card, which you can find on the sign-in table to the left of the door. So we are now moving on to item number 2, which is roll call. Ms. Lee, can you take roll call?
Chair Hicks,
Here.
Member Abekova is not present. Member Showalter,
Here. Okay, so we have one member absent, but still have a quorum. Now we're on item number 3, which is approval of the minutes. This would be the CSC meeting minutes from October 28th, 2024. Does anyone have any comments or questions about the meeting minutes? This would be people in person or online.
no one on Zoom.
And no speaker cards. And Mayor Showalter, do you have questions?
No, I move approval.
Okay, I second that. And all those in favor? Passes unanimously. We're now moving to item number 4 on the agenda, which is oral communications. This part of the agenda is for oral communications from the public, and this part of the agenda is for people wishing to address the committee on any items not on our agenda tonight. You can speak for up to 3 minutes, and we can't act on any of the items that the public might bring up. So is there anyone, I do not see any blue cards here. Is there anyone virtual who would like to make a public comment? No. Okay, so we've now finished item 4 and we're moving on to item 5, which is new business. 5.1 is the Sustainability Action Plan 4 progress update. And this item will be presented by Sustainability Division staff. Ms. Lee, do you have a presentation?
We do. Thank you, Chair Hicks. We can go to the next slide. Ms. Anderson and I will be presenting the update this evening. We wanted to start with just a bit of background for you. The Sustainability Action Plan number 4 was adopted in 2019, and our most recent update to Council Sustainability Committee was in May of 2023, so a year and a half ago approximately. At our September meeting, CSC requested an update on our progress, and so that's why we're here this evening to give you a status update. We're pleased to share that 84% of the measures within SAP 4 are either completed or ongoing, or and then 16% are in progress. And now I'll hand it over to Ms. Anderson to walk us through some highlights of the report. I don't think she'll walk us through every single update that was included in the memo.
Thank you, Ms. Lee. Yeah, so we're just going to be focusing on some highlights and several key SAP actions. So these first 2 slides show transportation actions. These 3 actions on this slide have been completed. As we've discussed at previous meetings, as a result of our e-bike voucher program, 85 low-income residents received incentives that were used towards the purchase of an electric bike. We've also deployed new charging infrastructure at multiple city facilities, including 2 downtown garages, the Civic Center, and the Municipal Operations Center. And our municipal fleet electrification plan has been completed and is now in implementation. Next slide, please. These 3 transportation actions are in progress. Council adopted the Vision Zero Policy Action Plan and Local Road Safety Plan this past September, and the Drive Wisely marketing campaign is underway. The Mountain View Transportation Management Association has been actively marketing the city's shuttle programs and expanding memberships to new residential developments. And staff is currently developing a citywide transportation demand management ordinance that will likely go to council for adoption in fall of 2025. Next slide. This slide provides updates on 2 energy actions. The first action is about analyzing opportunities for electrification during municipal renovations. This has become standard practice and is thus considered complete. The city has completed or made progress on several projects to electrify municipal equipment. A couple of notable examples include electrifying the HVAC system at Fire Station 1. And for 12 city facilities, they've undergone transitions to electric heat pump water heaters this year, which Ms. Lynn will talk more about in the next item. The second action is underway and involves implementing projects and programs to electrify existing buildings. So in 2025, the city is launching the Year of the Water Heater campaign, which we talked about in the last CSC meeting. And this will include an incentive to replace gas water heaters with electric heat pumps. And the campaign will be using about $300K from the Sustainability Fund to support implementation, including an amount that's, direct incentives. Through an agreement with Block Power, Mountain View also received targeted maps and building information on multifamily properties to help the city identify ideal locations for instituting electrification measures. Next slide, please. So this slide provides updates on actions related to off-road equipment and the tree canopy. The first action, which entails providing incentives for electric landscaping equipment, is complete. The city promoted rebates offered through state and regional programs. And we also partnered with the Day Worker Center to host 2 electric tool trainings for local landscape workers and to launch an electric tool library. The next 2 actions on this slide are underway. So Community Services is developing a new urban forest plan as part of the city's biodiversity strategy, and community engagement is underway for this project. CSD has also made great progress replacing gas-powered landscaping equipment with electric versions, and they estimate that about 50% of the city's handheld equipment has been transitioned to electric. So we're really pleased with that. Next slide. These next 2 slides cover core sustainability and outreach actions in the SAP. So these 3 actions are considered complete or ongoing. The first action is about allocating funds for municipal pilot projects and training. All of the funding originally designated to the action was allocated to the project that's going to electrify the water heating and the kitchen at the senior center. And staff is allocating through this process an additional $400K to this action for various fleet electrification pilots, which I think Ms. Lynn will talk more about. We've also hired 2 part-time staff to implement cohort 3 of Cool Block, which will focus on electrification in 2025. And council has adopted a resolution in support of plant-based eating, and outreach for plant-based eating is ongoing. Next slide. So these last 2 actions are in progress. S1.8 is about planning and implementing for municipal and community decarbonization. CSC and council have approved a scope of work with Cascadia, which includes a decarbonization goal analysis that we expect to be completed by the end of 2025. Staff is allocating about $160K to this action to host Climate Corps fellows who support various decarbonization initiatives. You'll also hear more about the municipal side of this during the second item today. And then the other item on the slide is about developing the climate vulnerability and resilience plan. So the scope of work with Cascadia also includes the climate vulnerability assessment, which should be completed by the end of next year. So that concludes my portion of the presentation. So I'll pass it back to Lee.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson. We also wanted to point out that all of the staffing that was funded through SAP4, all the positions have been filled. You can see an update of when those various positions have been filled, including my position. pleased to be here with you this evening, and Miss Lynn, who's here as well. Go ahead and go to the next slide. In total, the SAP budget was reached 9,700,000. This is due, it was an original appropriation of 7.5 million. As we've received grants to do decarbonization work, we've been appropriating them through SAP4 to do that work. And then we've also received additional allocations for grant matching activities in prior budget cycles. So over 3.5 million of SAP4 has been spent, and 1.5 million is held in reserve for these grant matching funds. So overall, over half of the funds have been spent or need to be held in reserve. We've also, in past meetings, talked with you about how SAP4 funds have been used to leverage additional funding. Especially that was the case within Public Works through the transportation projects. And then finally, I just mentioned, but the grants that we receive, and we have additional grants that we have submitted applications to, those would be added to the SAP budget, and then the work charged against that accordingly. Next slide. So that's the update that we had. And in addition to the memo, we just wanted to touch on some of the high points. We'd be happy to answer any questions. Our colleagues from Public Works are also here, so hopefully we'll be able to.
Well, do you want to touch on the high points first, or do you want?
No, so the presentation that Ms. Anderson just gave was the.
Was the high points, okay.
Yes.
So no more high points. Got it. So at this point, we can ask questions, then I'm gonna take public comment and then take any final comments we have, although we're not with the items and so forth. Dr. Showalter, do you have questions?
Sure. Yeah. Well, you said right at the beginning that 16% of the projects are in progress. And I wondered, are they the kind of things that we're really ever going to finish? Or are they ongoing things that, you know, will just be part of our sustainability efforts for a long, long time?
That's a really good question. I think we've tried to designate ones that are more just ongoing and part of it, you know, our general operations as completed, or you might notice some of these are completed / ongoing for status. So the ones that are in progress, most of them are ones that, you know, we do anticipate
discrete.
completing. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, all right. And then we've heard a lot in the news about EV chargers not working very well. People going to charge their cars someplace and, you know, the EV chargers are broken. So how are we doing at maintaining our EV charges, and who's responsible for it?
It's funny, we had a discussion just yesterday about this, that this is a difficult challenge for jurisdictions to solve for. We are lucky in that we just have replaced nearly all of our EV chargers. And so in general, our EV charging infrastructure is in good shape. We haven't been without glitches along the way where users haven't been able to access individual chargers, but overall our system, because it's relatively new, is functioning well. And we have been in discussions about whose responsibility. It kind of varies depending on the vendor contract that we have. I think in the case of the PowerFlex chargers that we have currently, the vendor is responsible for repairs to the infrastructure, but you know, it doesn't seem like any model offers a perfect solution to this challenge.
I just wanted to bring it up because we all know that if it's not on somebody's work plan, it's not nearly as likely to get done. And so sort of somebody needs to be responsible for just kind of keeping up for, or at least that's my experience. Somebody needs to be watching out for this. Maybe they oversee the contract or whatever, but it, you know, it's an ongoing thing. We're never gonna end. Okay. Because it's really a serious issue when somebody goes in and they can't there's 8 charges and only one of them is working or something, that's,
And there's a line.
and there's a line, yeah, that's not what we want. And then, I remember, it might have been 5 years ago, it was quite a while back. It was when Steve Attinger was here. He put together a report about how much money had been saved in electricity costs by all of our, all of our efforts. And it was really a lot. I forget, but I mean, it was millions of dollars. So, someday, it's something I would be interested in, in understanding is how is this working ongoing? Because we of course hear about all the money we spend on these, on these projects, but how much money, particularly in ongoing operations, do we save? Do we keep track of that?
It's a challenging thing to do. I know that Public Works is working on an asset management system, and that may help to centralize some of the data. But if we take a step back, one of the other drivers of the sort of challenge of answering this question is that, in the last decade or so, we've really moved from energy efficiency, which is generally speaking quite cost effective, to electrification, which is not
Not
always
necessarily.
exactly. And so the portfolio of the projects that we are now bringing before you, when we do have savings, like with the solar that went to the gym for the gymnasiums, and there was $4 million in savings, we of course make a big deal about it. And then sometimes we are silent, or we might say it's cost neutral, because that's as good as we can get a project to be when it's electrifying. Sometimes natural gas is cheaper, but we have other gains, right? We're going to
Oh, yeah, yeah.
reduce emissions and
I don't mean to, that it's like, that's like the only reason we would do something.
Right.
It's just an interesting component of the system.
it is.
And I think that, when, as the discussion goes on over the years, from time to time, revisiting that is a valuable piece of information to share with the community.
Yeah.
Okay, and then you mentioned that there were maps from Cool Block, or what's the name?
Block power.
Block Power, thank you. That show, good, good neighborhoods for multifamily electrification. Could you talk a little bit more about those maps and how we're going to use them?
Listen, do you think you could just describe the maps a little bit more?
Sure. So the maps from Block Power include both demographics data and also buildings level data. So there's, for example, energy use intensity, so we can identify buildings that use a lot of energy. And there's also different models that Block Power used when creating the maps. For example, to map whether a property would be very feasible for a heat pump HVAC system. So yeah, those are some of the factors that are included in that. And I believe they also include fuel source for certain appliances, so we can identify which buildings may be using large amounts of natural gas and could be a good candidate. So there's kind of a different variety of data contained in there.
And our hope is to work with Silicon Valley Clean Energy. Right now, they're launching a direct install program, I think more aimed at single family homes,
Yeah.
but they want to be thinking about multifamily. So our hope is that we will have this added body of data, and we might try to be in discussion with them about what kinds of programs we might consider piloting in partnership with an entity like SVCE. So now that we understand our building stock a little bit better, where the opportunity might lie, what sort of programs could serve the multifamily customers. So that's the hope. That's why we wanted that information.
Well, as your rep on SVCE, I'd like to kind of be kept appraised of that, so I can advocate for it appropriately, because I think you're right. Right now, I understand that the direct install is oriented toward single family homes, and also people who are, but lower income single family homes. So that's a very sort of, seems like in Mountain View, the lower income and single family homes aren't necessarily the same. I'm sure we have some of them. But Yeah, I mean, we in Mountain View, if we're really gonna crack this, we need to electrify our multifamily homes.
Right.
So we need to move up to the next step. Okay, all right, so. A lot more work to be done, but tremendous amount has been done. This is wonderful. Thank you.
So I'll start with my question. I have questions too, and luckily there are only two of us because because I have a lot of them. I'll say this is a comment, but I really enjoyed this report. You know, we hear about these things, but we don't hear the details a lot, so it was very engrossing. I'll start out with my block power. Do we have, you know, block power was so highly touted. Do you know what happened? Do you have like a backstory why they're not doing this anymore? And are there any lessons learned? And what are they doing? Are they just working with single family homes or what's the story there?
I think that really at the core of it, they've shifted their business model. It is a lesson learned in terms of, you know, how early along an adoption curve we want to be operating. Mountain View really pushes the envelope and we try to be leaders, and sometimes it's on the early side. Luckily, the way that our contract with Block Power was structured, we started first with this data and analysis that we will make very good use of regardless of whether they move into the implementation phase. So now that they're not focusing on multifamily,
So they switched to single family.
I believe that's the case. Is that your
Right.
understanding, Ms. Lynn?
It sounded like they were moving out of multifamily, at least in the Bay Area, and looking at much, much larger properties, either commercial or like extremely large multifamily
Oh.
buildings in like large, very large metropolitan areas, other geographic areas.
It's an interesting challenge in terms of partnering with the private sector. If their business priorities shift, you know, we do structure our contracts that either party can exit them with, you know, an appropriate amount of notice. So they've shifted their business priority.
So maybe they thought that was low hanging fruit, but it was actually more difficult and will also be more, maybe not low hanging fruit for us. The thing about not low hanging fruit is it may drop down later, so maybe don't do that first.
It's not the time yet. So we have the heat pump water heater for single family and we're starting there.
Yeah, I mean, maybe easy things first. I
Right.
hope that the
Make
others
some
become
gains.
easier.
We have Sunshine Gardens, which is an amazing example.
Yeah.
Right. There are opportunities still, and so we'll
Yeah.
see what the data shows us.
So other questions, let's see. Do you ever for our fleet, do we ever look at buying used vehicles? Because I've heard they've dropped in price, but I don't know a lot. And I don't know if that's a wise purchase. If people looked at that.
I wonder, Ms. Au, could we defer to you?
I'm not, I don't think in the past we've purchased used vehicles.
Yeah, I don't know enough about it, but I've heard that they've dropped a lot, so.
Or electric cars, electric.
Yes,
Some of those, I know just from personal experience, some of that is just older models with lower battery range.
it is. It
Those-
is lower
those are
battery.
the ones that have dropped. in price.
Right, but because I thought that those might be perfect for the city if you're just driving around the city, but.
Well, we can look into it.
Yeah, maybe ask that question. You have a comment on it?
Yeah, Silicon Valley Clean Energy has a program to help you find used electric vehicles, and that's all I know.
Okay, we'll keep that in mind. We'll look into it.
Yeah, I would also like it because that's sort of being touted by anti-EV people as a, you know, people want to sell them and they can't even sell them. And so I think that, you know, cities picking them up, it might work out for everyone, but I'm no expert on it. Just a thought. I was really interested in the Shoreline Amphitheater shuttle pilot. I'd like to hear more about that because in addition to, you know, reducing our carbon footprint, it seems like it would have multiple other benefits, like not so many inebriated people driving around that area, not so many traffic jams, and the people who live there now, the people in the mobile home park complain about being stuck there. And I think that as we build more housing there, it will be more and more of and it also might free up some space for expanding the safe parking there. So there are all sorts of co-benefits of doing that. So I'd like to hear a little more about
I see Ms. Lowe is in attendance. Might
Hello.
we ask?
it.
Maria Hoochgarrett, Low Transportation Manager. So we're actually in early stages. The city staff are negotiating with both the TMA as the shuttle provider and also Live Nation. Both parties, all three parties are interested in this opportunity. We've actually done a test run to see if it works. And so in the afternoon, the shuttles would come through Shoreline Park on one of the service roads there, and then kind of drop off that way, come from the transit center. And so it would kind of be an extension of an existing route that they run, but through the MVGO, not through the Mountain View Community Shuttle. It's the TMA using the MVGO services, and it would be a fee for service program. And I don't know about helping with the inebriated people because they would probably not be allowing them to board the bus. So if, they don't want how it
They're
works.
not inebriated when they go to the concerts.
Yes.
It's when they come back.
Yeah, so I think that they have, there has been some discussion about this very issue. We don't want people doing drunk driving, but we also don't want people throwing up on the shuttles. So there's kind of like a,
They just have had a drink or two.
I think that's fine.
There's a lot
That's
of
fine.
alcohol, so.
Yeah, so I think, but that is, you know, there's kind of a balance there.
Yeah, they're different.
So that has been a topic of discussion,
Interesting.
in terms of like making sure that people are behaving appropriately on the shuttle. So,
Interesting. So that's gonna be a pilot.
yes.
Well, that's a very interesting pilot. There's a lot of issues there.
Yeah, so I think, you know, that a lot of North Bay Shore has TDM requirements and the amphitheater doesn't at the moment, but this is kind of a toe in the water to
Yeah.
kind of
I
explore.
would really like it to work. It's really crazy the way the transportation is now. As a side issue, I'll say that many people living on, I live close to City Hall, but many people living on the other side of El Camino told me they would like a nighttime shuttle to downtown so that they can drink downtown and go home. So I guess shuttles and people who drink it's something maybe we should think through.
Yes, in moderation.
Shuttles and people who can guarantee they have had a drink in
Yes.
moderation, okay. Okay, well, so I look forward to hearing more about that. Then there's this part of the staff report also talks about, encouraging the TDM ordinance and encouraging people to use multimodal transportation with the goal of reducing VMT and drive alone trips. Does recent housing legislation make this more difficult to implement? Because we have heard people not want to pay fees and not want to do some of these things. So have you encountered much of that or?
Yeah, so if that's all right, if I can. So I think that it can work in both directions.
Okay.
So some of the new laws include zero parking minimums. Generally, less parking is considered a TDM strategy.
Uh-huh.
And also charging for parking is also a TDM strategy. Some of the other,
But that's kind of the stick. You need a carrot, like you can't just leave people with no transportation.
yes, and but then the other side of it is that eliminating minimums means that we don't have the lever of an in lieu
Right.
fee that we
Right,
could use
exactly.
for TDM.
Yeah.
So it can kind of work in both directions.
Yeah, I'd like to hear how that over time, I'd like more information on how that pans out. Because I don't want to be in the situation, because we need to tweak legislation if what we're getting is leaving people without parking, but also without transportation options.
Right.
Okay, another question is, so I was super happy to hear about all the building and so forth, electrification. Then the Ringstorf Aquatics Center, were there problems does anyone know, were there problems setting up the pool, the electrified, the heat pump pool heating, or I never heard the details about that.
Ms. Al, would you?
I'm not really involved in the project, but the major issue was, I think the contractor had missed some plumbing under the building. That's what caused the delay. Not so much the technology.
Okay, so you think it was
They
more?
left out some pipes underground, so it was hard to put in after the fact.
It's hard, yeah. So I don't know whether that was because they were less experienced with that technology or it was just a fluke.
No, I think the pipes are shown on the drawing, but just got missed.
Okay.
That's what I
I was
understand.
curious. And then that question I asked. Let's see. Yeah, and then I'm very interested in the electrification of landscaping equipment. I get a lot of calls about that or email about that because of the noise. So another one with co-benefits. And so I'd love to know, I mean, the staff report says how it went, but I'm wondering, like, are there next steps for enhancing it more, continuing to work more with the Day Worker Center? And I want to know partly so that I can tell people who are still contacting me and saying, when are all the leaf blowers gonna go away?
Well, of course, there's the state legislation that bans the sale at this point.
Sale, but they're still out there,
They
so
are still out there.
I'd like to, like, are we continuing, will the Day Worker Center be doing more training, or are there any next steps?
Lynn, what is the status and how is the tool lending library being utilized?
Well, yes, I was just, thank you, Chair Hicks, for the question. I was just trying to look up the latest stats, but the tool library is still active, and I believe our contract with the Day Worker Center runs through the middle of next year, so they'll continue to provide services, and I believe they have so far provided around 250 hours of electric landscape work through a couple dozen employers who hire the workers, so that wasn't, increase from the previous update from a few months ago, so we hope that it'll continue.
Okay, good to know. I think. So, and then looking at the staffing, is there a staff person here who helps people navigate the whole permitting, panel upgrading, condo problems, all those kind of things that people struggle with when they're trying to electrify their homes or other buildings? Is that any of these people, or is that more regular staff, not these particular people, any of these particular people?
I think that service, it's sort of people who help navigate any remodel project that customers come in with. I don't think that they have staff, correct me if I'm wrong, that are solely dedicated to walking through for electrification or for condos specifically. SVCE does have its concierge program, which is meant to layer on top of city building staff, and they will offer exactly what you've just described. So someone to handhold an applicant all the way through the process, kind of project concept, and then here's how to conversation with the city, and then through to actually implementing. So we've been promoting the concierge service to our residents, and we'll continue to do that. And then, of course, we'll be layering in our incentives for the heat pump water heaters. So
What's the feedback you're getting on the concierge service? Are people pleased with it? Is it helpful?
I do not know.
Does anybody
the
know
current-
how it's working? I mean, it sounds theoretically like a great thing. I just wondered. Well,
We're happy to check with SVC.
Yeah, I
about
would
it.
love a
Yeah.
report back on
I
that.
should ask at an SBC meeting. Sorry.
Or maybe you'll be doing the report.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we're happy to share.
Because I actually think it may be one of the most important things we do, because there's people running into so many problems, and maybe at some point we would want to take that on ourselves, you know, somebody who is with the city and is a little more of a specialist. Anyway, and then are we going to review, you know, the balance, of the, funding is getting lower? Are we gonna, is there a time we're gonna revisit that?
Absolutely. So at the council meeting earlier this week, the uh, decarbonization strategy and vulnerability assessment scope of work was approved. We'll be executing that contract. And as over the next year, we continue implementation of the SAP form items. And as we develop this strategy, I think we'll be well poised next year to come back and give a report out of our findings, and then start to think about when we might discuss the funding levels within SAP form.
That's a good timeline. Those are all my questions. I do have comments as well. But now it's time for any comments from the public. I don't see anybody here in person. Are there any people online wanting to comment?
No.
Okay. We can go into our own comments. Welcome to any comments?
Not right now. Go ahead.
Okay. Any comments? So first, the New York Times just within the past week had an article saying that installing EV chargers has just become a profitable business in and of itself. I mean, I guess they've always known or long known that it spurs sales. And I know that's been true for me when I've been charging. I've gone into Whole Foods and bought all my Christmas gifts there because I was hanging around there for so long. So I think that might be something we could, I don't know whether we could promote that through our economic vitality strategy. So it's not just the city putting in EV chargers, but, you know, so that other retailers would want to do that. as
Yeah,
well.
absolutely. We're happy to reach out to John Lang and his staff to discuss it, and I will find that article.
And then I totally concur with the mayor's comments about EV charger repairs. I've been on vacation and going to places that are on the map, but that are not actually functioning, or in a long line because only one of 6 chargers is working. So we do need a strategy for keeping, it's good they're new now, but at some point we will need a strategy for keeping them repaired. And I also like your question about tracking savings. I know all of our, the changes we make, the electrification changes won't provide savings, but I think that's something that the public would be interested in when they do. And I know that was in here in the staff report. Let's see. Other comments. Oh, I think I bring up this comment every time. There's core sustainability and outreach actions was a part of the staff report. And I would like to make sure that the council neighborhood committee is also a place where that kind of outreach can be done. And also I was surprised to read about a little surprised, but not completely shocked to read that when restaurants are, I'm actually, this is a bit of a question. When it says staff analyzed certification programs and found they don't appear to influence consumer behavior to patronize participating restaurants. In fact, it can have the opposite effect on consumers where they do not choose plant-based options if they're identified with a symbol or certification. Not totally shocked, but is that, so many of the menus, you know, of our restaurants downtown will have a vegetarian or vegan or other kinds of symbols. And I feel like they do attract people. So I'm kind of curious about hearing more about that one. I would think people would take them off the menu if they were absolutely turning people away. Do you have any additional information on that one?
Ms. Ramos, can I ask if you could share a little bit more about the analysis?
The several studies that have shown labeling plant-based foods in certain ways make people less likely to choose them. They were national studies. We did not do anything, you know, particularly with our local restaurants. It seems to be a case where people will look up and make sure that there's an option they need in advance if they are looking for a plant-based option. Whereas a person who's not looking for that then is more likely to choose that option if it wasn't labeled. That's what the studies have shown.
Is it like if the restaurant is certified vegan, then people will be like, oh, I don't want to go there, as opposed to one item on the menu? Or do you
It
know?
was more of an example of, we have two options. One is labeled vegan and the other's not. And people are more likely to choose the one not labeled that versus the same two options presented without any labels. And people are more likely then to go for the plant-based option than in the other case.
Interesting. And I wonder if there's a locational difference because everybody's labeling them. I mean, most of the menus in restaurants in this area are labeled that way. So anyway, I'm curious about that one and I'd like to, you know, because I don't want to encourage restaurants to do something that would turn away business, but that's an interesting dilemma. And I thought I had another comment about this. Let's see.
I do have a couple.
You have a
comments.
comment?
Not
Okay,
even-
do a comment and maybe I'll come back.
You've jogged my brain a little bit. One, while I was on the campaign trail, I got to go to the Plumbers 393 training place. It is huge. I mean, I don't know how big it is. It's probably 20,000 square feet. I mean, it is huge. It's a whole school on how to do plumbing and electrification kind of things. You know, they have big rooms with all these different heat pumps and teaching plumbers how to put in different heat pumps. And I'm not sure what the way is for us to work with them, but I just wanted you to be aware that this is going on. And if you'd like a tour of this place, I mean, I think you'd think it was quite a bit of fun, frankly, to go through it. And I'd be glad to make arrangements for that. And I know that SBCE is trying to work with them as a way to, make sure we have a cadre of contractors that are available to do this work. And that's one thing. Then another thing I wondered about is, I remember going to some conferences recently and long time ago, we used to talk an awful lot about, now we've been concentrating on electrification and not necessarily efficiency. But one of the efficiency things is insulation. And do we have any insulation incentives as part of our programs at the moment? Or are they?
Right, we did building envelope initiatives about a decade ago. In the last recession, there was a lot of
Right.
money from the federal government to launch energy upgrade, which still exists. And there are rebates and incentives. We don't offer supplemental incentives
Okay.
from the city, but there are.
What would be a good thing for us to educate people about, as birthday and at the counter and that kind of thing. So I just wanted, particularly if you're doing remodeling, people, that's a great time for people to do all of that stuff because it lowers their you know, it lowers their emissions. Then, I really like the idea of the Council Neighborhoods Committee. I'm on the Council Neighborhoods Committee, and I know that, that your sustainability team has come and tabled our neighborhood
Right.
meetings, and that's good, or I hope it's been good. I don't know. Yeah, I think that's been good. But it hasn't, we haven't done a lot of promotion other than that. So I think we should think about
Yeah,
what would
No, I
be.
do. I
what would-
think so too. I think there should be tabling at the
Yeah.
CNC.
And the other thing is that the different neighborhood associations have real different levels of sophistication. Some of them have been around for decades and they have newsletters and extensive email groups. And I was talking to one person today and they, you know, they have a weekly potluck, you know, I mean, there's all these things. And so as a communication vehicle, I think we should look into it. And it's gonna be kind of detailed because the one that the works at, you know, Monte Loma isn't gonna be the same for Old Mountain View. But that said, I do think it's a great way to get information out and one we shouldn't overlook. And it's also, it should be pretty inexpensive. And then,
I agree with that, and I'd say both Montaloma and Old Mountain View and probably some other neighborhood groups have publications that people read probably more than they read the city publications.
yeah, Quest to Park has a
And-
great one.
And they're always looking for articles.
Right.
So,
Yeah, and it might be a way to encourage the other neighborhood associations that don't have that to, you know, to get it.
they
I mean,
also
it builds a
usually
lot-
have advertisements.
Yeah.
That's another, if you want to go that
It
route.
builds a lot of community, but somebody's gotta do it. And, you know, we all know in any volunteer organization, that's a big gating item, and you gotta find the person who's willing to put in the time. But then that brings me to the other thing, and that is the use of volunteers. And I hope that, you know, we'll, particularly with the communication and with tabling, we will utilize our volunteer network. I mean, for instance, it seems like Sunshine Gardens, I know they have offered tours and that sort of thing, and they're like the poster child for electrification of multifamily homes. So just utilization of our volunteers, I really, I think it's very important for this sort of thing. And we also have Carbon Free Mountain View. What else do we have? Anyway, that's the other thing.
Well,
I just,
depending on green spaces, if you're talking about, you know,
Yeah.
native and drought tolerant.
right, and anyway, there's an ecosystem of volunteer organizations in the community. And that we could, you know, that we can use to help with communication. And I just think it's a good idea to keep those in mind. And, you know, as the council members probably have a little bit more connection with those than people who don't live in the community do, but we can help you with that if, you know, if that would be useful. So just want to bring that up. So those are my comments.
Okay, so I think we're ready now to move on to 5.2 on our agenda, which is municipal operations decarbonization implementation strategy. And this item will be presented by Sustainability Division staff. Ms. Lee, will you start the presentation?
Certainly. Thank you, Chair Hicks. We're just bringing up the PowerPoint. But just to introduce this topic, this is, if we think about it, sort of a small slice of the community-wide effort to decarbonize. And of course, Mountain View as we are leaders both at the community scale, we want to be also leaders in our own operations. So we've been in great discussion with our colleagues in many departments because it's really citywide that this work needs to be conducted. We can go to the next slide. Thank you. So SAP 4, one of the items within SAP 4 was a directive to staff to work on municipal facility decarbonization projects, excuse me. And what we've really seen as we have done our greenhouse gas emissions inventories for facilities is that buildings and fleet are the largest opportunity for reducing our emissions. We're planning a two-phased approach to this work. We'll go to the next slide. So here's a reminder, we presented the 2023 municipal greenhouse gas inventory to CSC previously. We do this inventory periodically, not every year. And if we look at buildings and facilities, it's well over 2/3 of, not well over, but 2/3 of our emissions. We do have robust programs for employee commute, and solid waste as well. We have a zero waste goal, for our whole community, so. One thing to note is that we have removed the shoreline landfill emissions from the municipal inventory. The emissions still appear in the community-wide greenhouse gas emissions inventory, but that's sort of based on the assumption that the emissions are from garbage that was disposed of by the full community, not just garbage originating from city operations. So it made more sense to have those emissions attributed at the community scale. We can go to the next slide. So our phases are really meant to be pragmatic and to consider the fact that we're doing this community-wide analysis about what is the most strategic way to approach decarbonization. So as we conduct that analysis in partnership with Cascadia, what we're focusing on in phase 1 for our municipal operations is really what we are thinking of as the low-hanging fruit. Heat pump, water heater installations, fleet electrification, and then really urgent equipment replacement. If we know something is about to be at the end of life or is at the end of life, then planning to replace that with an electric option makes sense. It's the most cost-effective time. And then the phase 2 will be a much more systematic look at all of our holdings as an organization, and understanding how most cost effectively and in terms of reduction of emissions, how to replace the remaining equipment so that we're all electric. Okay, and I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Lynn to walk us through kind of a little bit more detail about both of those phases.
Thank you, Ms. Lee. Phase 1 will be taking place over the next 18 months and really focuses on the 3 different parts which Ms. Lee mentioned. The heat pump water heater installations, fleet electrification, and then the urgent projects, which Ms. Lee mentioned, which primarily consists of gymnasium heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems for 2 of the gyms at our local middle schools. So diving into the heat pump water heater project, we have had some success in installing heat pump water heaters at several facilities listed on the slide. This was done at no cost through a PG&E program, and we have secured around $330,000 in incentives by receiving these heat pump installations at no cost, in addition to efficiency and safety benefits. We also have been told by the implementer that we should expect utility bill savings from this portfolio of water heater projects. This project was a really close partnership between the facilities team and the sustainability division. And so we worked very closely to complete these projects successfully and quickly in the past year. And the next projects planned for installation are the Mountain View Sports Pavilion and Wisman Sports Center water heater replacements. And those are anticipated to save another about $100,000 in capital costs and also add to the utility bill savings. So after we install the, sorry, in the previous slide, once we finish installing those projects, we will have electrified the vast majority of our gas water heating systems that we've identified. And the remaining projects are slightly harder to electrify cases, either based on the space constraints or design. So we would work to analyze those different sites to figure out next steps. For on the fleet electrification side, we have completed a high-level fleet electrification strategic plan, which the Public Works team led in conjunction with our consultant Optiny. And that provides guidance on vehicle replacement recommendations and vehicle charging needs for the fleet at a quite a high level. We see one of the next steps as establishing a capital improvement program for electric vehicle charging to make sure that we have the infrastructure available to support the electric vehicles that will be purchased. And Sustainability and Public Works staff will work closely to install charging and public purchase electric vehicles upon replacement wherever possible. And of course, we plan to collaborate with departments in an ongoing way, just all the departments have any vehicles in use. And we plan to look for incentives ongoing from SVCE and other sources. So here is a summary of our 4 near-term priorities to move forward on fleet electrification. The first is to explore an electric or green fleet policy. This is a type of policy that is pretty wide-ranging and has been adopted in different cities, both within the Bay Area, but also outside California and nationally. And it generally encourages electric vehicles or zero-emission vehicle purchase, and often includes some exceptions to make sure that there's flexibility for staff to determine, operationally what vehicle is the best choice. But we plan to explore this with departments to figure out what policy could really work well for departments. And there's a couple of different benefits for having an electric or green fleet policy. It really helps the city to take a leadership position in electrifying the fleet, but it's also a good planning tool for looking forward and understanding, what the financial costs and anticipated purchase vehicles will be over the next several years. The second near-term priority here is prioritizing electric during vehicle replacements. And the fleet team is already doing this, I believe, in all of its discussions with departments. And there are some electric vehicle purchases planned from 1 or 2 departments. The third priority is to conduct electric vehicle pilots wherever there's interest from departments. Our police department is interested in piloting 2 electric vehicles in their patrol fleet. And so the sustainability team is working with them on that and to make sure that there's electric vehicle charging to make that happen. Mobile EV charging could be a good option for deploying quickly and also being very flexible because it can be moved to different sites where necessary. In the top photo in the upper right corner, we have a solar plus battery EV charger, which is a standalone grid independent charger that fits within 1 parking space. So that's an interesting option that staff is exploring. And then the bottom option is, another variation of mobile charging that is not solar, but it's trickle charged from the building's energy and which fills up the battery slowly and then disperses charging to several electric vehicle ports. So these solutions all range in function and in price. So staff is exploring that to see what would be the best fit. Okay, so moving on to the third priority for phase 1, which is replacing systems that are at their end of life. The 2 biggest systems that we see as a priority are the Mountain View Sports Pavilion HVAC system and the Wisman Sports Center HVAC system. These systems will need to be replaced soon, and heat pump installation would have, additional benefits to gas, such as adding cooling, which isn't currently installed for the schools. And the next steps that we see here are to conduct heat pump HVAC project planning and to apply for funding opportunities, such as some SVCE grants that will be available in the coming year. There's also solar currently being planned for these sites, which will be installed by spring 2026 and will complement the heat pumps by supplying the necessary energy. For phase 2, we see this as a much broader effort starting in 2026 onwards. And the first aspect to this is long-term planning through an asset management system. As Ms. Lee alluded to, there's an asset management system that will be developed by the Public Works team and their consultants over the next few years. And we see this as a good tool to monitor different decarbonization opportunities and to track different assets that the city has across all of its facilities. So we plan to utilize that for long-term decarbonization planning. And the second aspect of phase 2 is electrification of remaining facilities and assessing any solar and battery projects that may be a good fit for the remaining facilities. And that could provide operational benefits as well as potential bill savings. And next steps we see include completing the water heater installations and HVAC studies or planning phases, engaging with the departments on a green fleet policy and updating this committee in the spring, and deploying mobile EV charging in the next year or so. And lastly, we plan to strategize on funding approaches for completing the many projects that are planned for phase 1. And with that, I'll pass it back to Ms. Lee in case you have any closing comments on the presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Lynn. No closing comments from me, but we're happy to answer any questions. Our colleagues from Public Works have been participant and really partner in both the community-wide efforts as well as especially the municipal efforts.
Well, lots of really good work. Member Showalter, do you have questions?
I have some comments, but I don't have any questions. This is great.
I have mostly questions. So I'll ask mine. So I'm wondering about, you read a lot about with AI and so forth, people using more electricity on their devices. And I'm wondering where is that captured? That's captured under the category of building some facilities, I would guess. It would be increasing electricity use, or is that how?
I think when a lot of the articles that I've read about AI are more the data centers that are needed to run the AI systems. So that might not appear locally within Mountain View.
That's what I'm wondering, where it gets counted. But I've heard every time I do a Google search, like even on my phone, that it's 20 times the energy that it used to be, which must mean I'm charging more.
Right.
Which must mean I'm paying more for electricity. It can't just be at the data center.
It's not only at the data center. I think there's just the larger proportion of the energy consumption is at the data center. But yes, of
Just
course.
something I want to make sure that we're keeping track of, if it really is, like some of the AI energy use that I'm reading about is developing products. They're reading all this information, and that is not something that I would be doing in my home or that you'd be doing here. But I am interested in, and the other thing I'm interested in, there's all this talk of smart cities and different things you can put in traffic management. I'm interested in the energy consumption if we start to incorporate some of those things, is the energy consumption worth whatever the result is, or have we been, oversold on some product?
Yes, I know that the city, maybe Ms. Bamberg can add to this, but we are working on an AI policy and work group is being developed. So this can be part of the discussion.
I would
potentially
definitely,
there.
I would definitely like the sustainability staff to be a part of that, because I think, when you think about sustainability, think the 3 R's: reduce, reuse, recycle.
Right.
And reduce is number one and the most effective. And I just want to make sure we're not purchasing things that have, that a salesperson may make sound very good, but are not really worth the energy consumption or the money,
Right,
my tax dollars or whatever.
certainly. Okay.
Okay, so that's one thing on my mind. Then for all this, and maybe this is the previous item too, and maybe this is too early to answer, but do you see changes with the new federal administration? Do you foresee how that will change your work, or should I ask you in 6 months?
We don't have any specific projections as of yet. Of course, the new administration has not yet been put in place, and so we have to see
Yeah,
first.
I'll ask you next time.
Yes.
But it's like incentives maybe for like EV, buying EVs, and I imagine other incentives as well that you're working with.
Right, exactly. And I think that federal funding as well could be an area that is impacted.
Okay, well, I'd like to see that on the agenda in the future.
Certainly.
And then I was really interested in the part of the staff report on renewable microgrids. And the fact that that one of their benefits would be continuity during power outages as well as cost savings. Can you tell me more about where you would think of using those? I've read a little, but I could learn much more.
Well, we recently had an EOC drill. I was unable to attend. I was out of town, but I know that generators were part of the discussion. So if we think of some of our core facilities where we have backup power now in the form of a generator, it's possible that those might be good candidates to look at as potential sites to have an alternative to a generator. So it could be used like that. So as we think about where our core emergency facilities are, having backup or continuous power at those first might make the most sense.
And then it might, at some point where you have a lot of facilities such as here with the Performing
Community
Arts Center and the
center. Mhm.
library and
Right.
that being a place where people might come during power outages and.
Right, we saw that at the library, that was a real hub for people. It's just the place that they thought to go when power was out. So being able to ensure that the library has continuity of operations is certainly important.
Yeah, so that's another topic I'd like to continue to hear about, microgrids. And I'm just wondering, as we do larger apartments, whether those are I know you don't tell them what to do or not do microgrids, but like there's a development going from multiple blocks down from El Camino down Castro, and those seem like the kinds of places that are big enough that might be good candidates. So that's a topic I continue to be interested in, and with I would say, lack of work I expect federally on this subject over the next several years. We had a lot of complaints about power outages, at least I got a lot last year during the storms.
Right.
And I expect we'll continue to do that, so this is an interesting topic. There were two things you covered that I just didn't understand what they were. First, I'd like to know more, in the staff report, more about mobile chargers. What are mobile chargers?
Yeah,
and how do they work?
It's for fleet, although they do have outlets, so they could be used for other purposes, but they're mobile EV charging infrastructure,
So
so
you just carry it with you and plug
you
it in
could tow it
somewhere.
behind a vehicle and bring it to a location. So it could, in addition to just being flexible, so for example, our police building, if we're going to be rebuilding it, if we have mobile charging there that's available, we could move it elsewhere, do this renovation instead of installing infrastructure at a location that we will be doing renovations on shortly. And then it could also be used in cases of emergency. So if we open up an EOC and we need additional charging, we could bring mobile chargers that were already pre-charged to that location as we have more EVs in our fleet.
Because you could pilot places and see
Right.
whether they're used and if they're not used much in that location.
Exactly. And then the off-grid example that Ms. Lynn shared, at counties in particular, I've heard of discussions where they were considering those locations where the grid reliability was, remote county parks. We don't have locations quite like that here in Mountain View, but there are many different applications for them.
Okay, and then also, what was the trickle charge that you mentioned?
Right, rather than having to upgrade service at a given facility, if you have these large, they're basically battery packs. And you slowly charge them so that they're ready to be deployed in the case of an emergency, then you won't spike the demand for electricity.
It's slow. charge.
Exactly.
Okay. Understand. Do you have questions now? So, and does anyone virtually have questions or comments? Okay, then, do you have comments?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think this is great. I'm really glad to see this. I really appreciate it, and I think it's so important that as a, as a municipality that we walk the walk. And I think it's very important for government trust, and I hope we can get the story out about this. I think, I'm not quite sure, but maybe we can get the Voice to run a couple articles. We have a great communication staff now. If we could help with that. And then talking about the 22% of our emissions that are attributable to employee commutes. And thinking about that, I think the SVCE used EV car program is probably best for that. Because people have very discrete commutes, they know how far they live from work. And as you mentioned, a lot of these cars are the ones that don't have the long range, but I've talked to several people who bought them and they've been able to get just what they considered fabulous deals on cars that they, were really good for just knocking around town and commuting. So I just wanted to mention that as an opportunity. And hasn't our shuttle been electrified recently? Or has it always?
Slow.
We have, so currently they're operating on the typical gas powered shuttles, and we've ordered some for lease, which will arrive in January.
Because I know we okayed a contract for some sort of a charging facility, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And that will charge the new buses. The buses actually arrive before the charging station.
Okay. So what's the time frame on that?
I
Roughly.
think it's summer next year, so yeah, a little bit of a gap. We can probably get them charged somewhere else in the interim. So
All right, so be interesting. Well, in the future, it will be interesting to hear how that works. Okay, but no, I think this is really fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah, so my comment is pretty much the same, that it was wonderful to read and we need to get the word out. There's not a lot of positive news out there these days, so I think whether it's through neighborhood newsletters, the CNC, I would love to have some, some tabling information that puts out the good news. That was a sandwich board.
Okay.
Sandwich board. Yeah, and with the Voice as well. I was impressed with, from the staff report, the quantification of the savings from the water heaters that you've gotten installed. It was taking almost 100 cars worth of carbon out of the system for a year. I think those kind of stories and those quantifying them, I think they're great. And I think they also incentivize people to do things personally at home when they see what the impact is.
I see a game being produced for related to this.
Game, like a trivia game or.
Yeah, how many cars were taken off by this, that you could spin the wheel, or you could have, little things that you opened the door and it told you how many, I don't know.
Advent calendar.
Yeah.
Yeah, an advent calendar, right?
I love it. Yeah, we were really happy. The consultants who implement the PG&E program have to do the cost calculation in order to qualify projects for participation. So they do this detailed analysis to qualify individual people. Water heater.
That's how you get it.
Yes, it's really excellent though.
Yeah, and it's easy, makes it easy to picture.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, great work. Keep it up.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, we are now moving on to item 6, which is committee staff comments, questions, and committee reports. No action will be taken on any questions raised by the CSC at this time. So does anybody have comments, questions, or reports this evening?
I just wanted to make a very quick comment. I've tried to point out many of our partners in other departments and across the city. And you have our almost entire sustainability team, and I just want to acknowledge that they're also doing a lot of this really excellent work, and they're a pleasure to work with. So just wanted to take a moment to appreciate them. Our fellows are over there. Well, one of our two fellows is here this evening, but yes, just to allow me to thank them too. Thank you.
Thank you from me as well.
Great. And I would just, I'll share this at the, I think I shared it last night. I went to the EENR meeting of the National League of Cities. We are committed to maintaining our principles, the principles that we've decided on that we want to advocate for. So the focus of the discussion was on what are the expected changes from the federal government. And as you said, nobody really knows for sure. But a lot of it is gonna have to be, perception is that a lot of it will be going to have to really sort of change the messaging. So that instead of talking about greenhouse gas reductions, we're talking about efficiency. We're talking about job growth and that kind of thing. So that was a lot of what the discussion was about. And I will be passing on that mega email from Carolyn Burnt that has all the presentations that were given. It came in yesterday. I'll send it on to you to share. But yeah, I you know, when I go to these things and I listen to what people are doing at you know, people are doing in other places, there's just a lot of bragging I get to do. You know, we really, you know, you're really doing cutting edge work, and that's wonderful. And so I certainly appreciate it. So thank you.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of telling the story, I think we have to talk about it as part of a viable economy. I mean, pretty soon you're not gonna be able to buy home insurance, so, so we do have to. You know, it's just a part of being viable, it's not optional.
Yeah.
Okay, are there more reports? Then we are moving on to item 7, which is adjournment. And this meeting is adjourned at 7:18 p.m. in time for you to tune into the carbon-free mountain meeting.
That's supposed to be about Berkeley.
Yeah.